Good afternoon. Welcome to the Maryland edition of our state webinar series exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience for everyone. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section of the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square. That decouples it from the control panel. Then you can type your question or any comments in there, and we will allow plenty of time for questions during and at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and we'll send the link to the recording to everybody who registered. Please feel free to share the recording with others. So let me introduce myself. I'm Chris Coffin. I'm American Farmland Trust Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Jamie Mira, AFT's Mid-Atlantic Regional Director. Jamie joined AFT in February, and she is based in Washington, D.C. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. AFT is a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We started as and remain an agricultural land trust, but that is one small part of our work. We care not just about protecting acres, but inches as well, and have initiatives focused on tools to help farmers improve soil health and water quality. We also believe it is not farmland without farmers and focus on the viability side of agriculture, including training service providers to help beginning farmers gain secure access to land. Our programming is grounded in research and informs our state and federal policy development and advocacy. So let me now turn it over to you, Jamie.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners. These include the Maryland Department of Agriculture, the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, Maryland Department of Planning, Maryland Agricultural and Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation, Million Acre Challenge, and many Maryland land trusts and local governments. So thank you all for joining us. And now I'd like to introduce a very special guest, Michelle Cable, the Executive Director of the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation. Michelle, we are so grateful to have you with us today. Thank you. We thought we would start out by asking your perspective about farmland loss in Maryland, and I have a few questions for you.
Sure thing. Thanks for having me.
So, Michelle, why should Maryland residents care about farmland loss?
So I would actually like to answer this question instead of focusing on caring about the loss, instead caring about the agricultural industry as a whole for the state of Maryland. For Maryland, the agriculture industry, it's about economics, it's about land use, it's our history, but we also want to make sure that it's our future. So for the state of Maryland, apart from the United States federal government, agriculture is the single largest industry in Maryland. Maryland's food, feed, and fiber industries combine for a total economic impact of close to $20 billion, with another $1 billion for just the equine industry. In addition to that economic impact, it provides over almost 84,000 jobs, and a third of our land mass for the state of Maryland is farmland, about 2 million acres. We're home to over 12,000 farms, 90% of which are family owned and operated. So that is really kind of the numbers of why is agriculture important, therefore why is farmland important. So how do we want to keep that and have, minimize and care about the farmland loss. In 2017, the most recent agricultural census, it provided that our demographics for the agriculture industry shows an aging workforce, and your AFT report talks about this as well. Our average farmer and producers in Maryland are 57 years old. We have more seniors than young people working in farm, and this age is increasing. With the current generational change that will be soon upon us, if not already, one of the ways to ensure that the farmland will always be there is through operations and programs like the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation, MALF, and the myriad of other programs around the state, both public and private, that are working toward land conservation. So caring about farmland loss really means caring about the agricultural industry and making sure that we have that available to continue our strong history for Maryland into the future and to keep our economy supported.
Thank you. So how might this report inform the work of the foundation of MALF?
Yeah. So this report is really, it's interesting. At the time it came out, not long after the information from the most recent agricultural census. I think they support one of each other in findings, especially talking about how as your report talks about, the low impact or the low density development, or sometimes people could even call them the smaller farms or farmettes. While our number of farms across the state have not changed in total numbers, the size of those farms have decreased, that average size. So having the smaller and smaller farms lend themselves to new opportunities, especially when you get closer to the urban, suburban areas. You can have more urban agricultural, niche or specialty operations. The smaller the farm, the less opportunities you have for long-term viability and success. So reports like the one that you have done can really help inform the Department of Agriculture, help inform MALF. We recently at Department of Agriculture established and published a strategic plan for Maryland agriculture in December of 2019. And the report that you all have provided and the information that you have done really can help us provide additional information as we move forward in the implementation of our strategic plan, as well as future updates in that. So I always am a strong believer of more information, the better the decisions we can make going forward.
Wonderful. My last question for you is, how can stakeholders help to move some of these findings forward?
Well, it is definitely a stakeholder-driven success. The agricultural preservation has been widely supported across the whole state, across party lines. This is not a one bucket group of people are supporting. And Maryland really has been a leader in land conservation and land use planning for decades. We were one of the very first purchase agricultural easement programs established in the whole country. And while we have made significant accomplishments and commitments to protect agricultural land and support the industry as a whole, there is always room for improvement and growth. The continued support by stakeholders for statewide programs and departments and agencies and private land trusts that not only focus on land conservation, but also on smart land use planning truly is essential. The comprehensive studies and reports like yours really will help educate and inform stakeholders at all levels to how and where we should focus our work. The easy answer is always often, well, we need more money for more land conservation. But land conservation alone through these voluntary programs won't ensure continued success of Maryland's agricultural industry as a whole. Easements are one tool in this toolbox, and it's an important tool, but it's not the only one. By educating and promoting a diverse group of our Maryland citizens about the importance of agriculture is our greatest success for a long-term viability of our agricultural industry.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michelle. We really appreciate your thoughtful comments and look forward to engaging with you and Mouth and others further around ways to keep farmland in farming.
Thank you.
So now I will turn it back over to Chris.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And thank you again so much for joining us, Michelle. You have such great perspectives, and I am very grateful to you for having agreed to join our steering committee for the National Agricultural Land Network, because having your voice and the expertise collectively from Maryland as a state will be invaluable. And plus, I have to say, I love the picture of you and Davey. What a great shot. So let's now talk about the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today, we're focused on the state of the states, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us for our launch events last month, I want to touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a short period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized how just big of a threat it is. And importantly, as you see here, 4.4 million of the total conversion occurred on land that we have identified as nationally significant. This is land best suited for intensive food and crop production. As you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the U.S., no longer confined to the coastal parts of the U.S., particularly in the Northeast and the West Coast. Small cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to dive into the data available for Maryland on the new interactive website that we've created for this project. Jamie and I are joined today by our colleague Beth Fraser, who is going to help us navigate through this website. So we want to go through it in a way that helps you all see what this website can do, what are the resources available on it. And so that's why we're hopeful that this tour will prove useful to everybody. So let's start with this reports and data tab. This explains the fact sheets that explain the methodology for many parts of this project. If you're interested in gaining access to the geospatial data we used, you can go to this geospatial data layers tab that the pointer is on and make a request. There is a form there, and we will be in touch with folks, I think beginning in July, with explaining what exactly is available. So now let's go to the drop-down menu and choose Maryland. And here you'll see both spatial data and the policy scorecard. We're going to start with the spatial data, and Beth, if you could go to the conversion summary, that would be great. So for every state, we've created a 2-page conversion summary. We've done a similar 2-page policy scorecard summary. We hope these are useful. They have some great infographics. You can download them and print them off easily for the meetings with donors and policymakers, and to put in newspapers and on websites. So that we hope that this is a useful, quick info sheet, this one and the policy one as well. So going back, let's start with land cover and use. Farms Under Threat, the state of the states, uses multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of ag land use in the United States. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low density residential development. You see that there in the kind of burnt orange. It also includes a first ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm or ranch. Our mapping shows about 2.3 million acres of agricultural land in the state, including 433,600 acres of woodland associated with farms. So let's move to PVR values. For farms under threat, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. The darker the green, the higher the value, which indicates the higher suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. And Beth, if you would toggle, if you see up here on the left-hand side, you can see that there are two different ways of navigating both the map that we're on now, and if you turn to the satellite, again, what you see here is the range of PVR values. With the darker the green, the higher the productivity, or as we say, productivity for intensive food and crop production. So you see that this is a tool that you can go back and forth between, toggling between map and satellite. So we use these PVR values to identify nationally significant land. And this next map will show you is the nationally significant land in Maryland. You'll see that about 1.5 million acres of land falls into this category. That's about 66% of the state's agricultural land base. About 1.24 million acres of this is cropland, with 168,000 acres of pasture and 114,000 acres of woodland. The loss of this highly productive land has both economic and environmental implications. When nationally significant land is impacted by development, intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands where input costs are typically higher, crop yields are typically lower, and soils degrade more quickly. So let's go to the last category, which is conversion. This data looked at a 15-year period, again from 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts with a recession in the midst of it. We mapped the conversion of ag land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed, or UHD. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas, typically found in cities and towns. This category, though, also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, including oil and well pads and solar panel installations. The second type is low-density residential development, or LDR. This is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. You can see that the majority of conversion, 72,600 acres, or 71% over this time frame, was to LDR. It's important to note here that there may still be active agriculture on land designated as LDR, and some of that agricultural production, as Michelle was saying at the beginning, may be very profitable. But we also know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. land in Maryland that was considered LDR in 2001 was 10 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land use by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who have to deal with farming in and around non-farm neighbors. So total ag land converted over this period was 102,700 acres. About 48,000 of this was cropland. And then you can see the rest of the data on the website. This conversion happened, whoops, I'm sorry. Let me just stop there. That again, conversion was 102,700 acres, and of the land converted, about 58,000 acres, or 56% of that, was land considered nationally significant. So let me stop there and turn it back to Jamie and Michelle for any perspectives that the two of you want to offer on what we're seeing here.
Michelle, I'll let you take it away.
I don't have a lot of any different insight offers to offer here. I will say that our Department of Planning for the state of Maryland really tracks and monitors and disperses this information. They have some excellent resources on their website. They have a dashboard link on there that tracks, talks about land use and conservation efforts throughout the state that I would leave it to them as the experts on this. I do know for our MOUth program, we have focused and put priorities through a ranking system for counties that we have certified and non-certified counties. And within those certified counties, there are designated priority preservation areas, or PPAs, that we give priority to in the ranking process to where easements will be acquired. There are other similar designated focused areas of other easement programs. The Department of Natural Resources has a Rural Legacy program that they also have designated specific areas to focus the land conservation efforts. So I will say that there are ways to prioritize areas of the state and areas of the counties to focus our land preservation efforts. That doesn't mean there aren't opportunities elsewhere, but they might not mesh as well with our agricultural easements. It might be a different type of program or land trust that works with them rather than one of the state programs. So that's probably about all that I would have to add for that.
Great, thank you. That is very helpful. We're going to move to policy, but before we do, we want to ask the audience a question. And this is what you all see as the biggest threat in terms of conversion drivers over the next 10 to 20 years. And we ask that before we go to policy because it helps to think about what policy tweaks might be needed depending on what we think is going to drive conversion over the next, again, 10 to 20 year horizon. Feel free to vote for more than one of these. And if you think that there is a conversion driver that is not listed here, please feel free to put it in on the comment line. And lastly, if you're having trouble voting, it might be because you're in full screen mode, in which case you have to go out of that mode to be able to vote. So we will give it a pause and let people vote here. Great. Okay. Let's see. So this is very consistent when we've asked this of audiences on other state webinars that we've done, that again, that poorly planned and more commercial, residential, industrial development tends to be the biggest concern, followed by that generational transfer of land. But also recognizing that ag viability continues to be a challenge. We know that it has been especially hard for producers in certain sectors, not just over this past pandemic period, but well before that. So recognizing that there are many different factors that go into conversion. So let's turn to the policy scorecard. Our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address these drivers of conversion. So poorly planned development, weak ag viability, and the fact that land is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. While AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development around agricultural land retention and protection since our founding, this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. We know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score them all. There are very successful grant loan programs, marketing programs. In Maryland, Marbidco has a suite of types of programs, as do other entities. And we salute them all as efforts to support and encourage the business of farming. But we wanted to focus on 6 different types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land. So these are purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, or farmland preservation programs, or PDR programs. In Maryland, we included both the agricultural land preservation program and rural legacy in our scorecard. We looked at land use planning and growth management. Now here we understand that land use planning and growth management are driven largely by planning and zoning decisions made at the county and municipal level. Our intent with this piece of the scorecard is to look at how state governments are helping to support and steer these local decisions in a way that supports agriculture and the agricultural land base. We looked at property tax relief. So this is current use or preferential use or agricultural use assessment, recognizing that preferential tax relief is a recognition that farmland and other working lands tend to pay far less and require far less in services than they typically get charged for in property taxes. We looked at agricultural district programs. Again, these are a number of states have them that incorporate a number of different protections and incentives for farmers in those districts. And then we looked at farm link programs and state leasing programs, and how are these programs helping to encourage opportunities for next generation farmers to get on the land, and how do you help those exiting and retiring farmers and farmland owners get their land into the hands of new generation farmers if they want to keep their land in agriculture. So let's now look at how Maryland scored. Obviously, Maryland is a powerhouse. As Michelle said, that Maryland has been a leader and an innovator in so many aspects of agricultural, both planning and farmland protection. And we want to recognize that right at the outset. But let's dig into just some of the scores to talk a little bit more about them. So here you can go to the select the policy or the program. And here we'll start with land use planning. Again, Maryland, a leader and an innovator in land use planning, and that's reflected in the score here. Maryland stands out for having farmland protection planning, the fact that it's got a 2019 strategic plan for agriculture. It has state goals around smart growth and farmland protection and reinforces those goals through investments in the state's priority funding areas. The reason you see here why Oregon and Washington score higher on this policy is that both of those states require a level of consistency with state goals around growth management and farmland retention and impose penalties for non-compliance. So they have a carrot and stick approach, and that is what gave them a slightly higher score than Maryland. So let's turn to PACE programs. As I mentioned earlier, we scored Maryland on both the Ag Land Preservation Program and Rural Legacy. Maryland was first in the country with a PACE program in 1977, again, as Michelle mentioned, along with Massachusetts and Connecticut, who always want to say they were first too. Maryland scores are high across the board except for annual monitoring and provisions promoting ag use and ownership. For monitoring, we looked only at MALF, not Rural Legacy. We know that easements purchased in part with federal dollars are monitored annually, but others are monitored less frequently. And you see that other states scored higher for having more frequent monitoring. There were states that got points for provisions promoting ag use and ownership. Those are provisions that either require an affirmative farming clause in their easement deed or use a tool known as an option to purchase at agricultural value. These are both intended to limit the likelihood that protected land will be sold to a non-farming buyer at an inflated price and who may take that land out of agricultural use. We do want to point out important innovations that Maryland has done that are not reflected in this score. So that, for instance, is the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program. In our full State of the States report, we do profile this program as a promising approach, and we'll look to that and to other innovations of Maryland that other states can emulate. I should say, and Beth, if you would toggle down to the bottom, you see at the bottom how we've scored all of these, how folks got points, what was included in the score, and so that's just a helpful thing to have that background information. And we have additional further information if folks are interested in it. One last note on the PACE front, which is with regard to federal funding. We know that the state has been challenged in aligning its easement deed terms with those required through the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. We're aware of this problem, and AFT looks forward to working with you, Michelle, and other partners to find a way to address this issue so Maryland can once again look to USDA as a source of additional funding for its farmland protection efforts. So let's do very quickly on the property tax relief. Again, shout out to Maryland for being the first state in the country to enact preferential tax treatment. The reason why Maryland doesn't get a higher score even is because we were not able to get enrollment data for the program. I'm not sure if this information is tracked or not. If it's not, it should be. So let's look very quickly just at FarmLink. We commend the state for investing in this type of effort here. States that scored higher than Maryland had explicit statutory authority for their program, and they track the number of successful referrals made through the program. We recognize that doing that tracking requires staffing and that requires resources. We appreciate that that is a challenge for many programs, but again, in the ideal world, it would be good to be able to see how successful the referrals are. And so lastly, let me just quickly point out on state leasing. This again is looking at how available state-owned land is for agriculture. It's clear that Maryland is offering land, has some land available, and that is being promoted for agricultural use. The states that scored highest in this area are those that have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land beyond just lands managed by natural resource agencies. We feel that this is an important mechanism for identifying new land access opportunities, especially what might be smaller plot parcels managed by other agencies in and near urban areas. So I'm going to stop there. I hope it was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you have questions, please do write them down now. As we go out of the website, we're going to launch a second poll which asks which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Maryland. And again, you see that because we only had 5 spots, we did not include state leasing or farm link, but if you think that one of those is the most important, please feel free to write those in instead. Okay, Beth, let's go ahead and look at that. Again, this is useful to know. The National Agricultural Land Network will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more about specific policy elements. Land use planning has emerged as the top vote getter in all of these, so I think we will spend a lot of time focusing both on those state tools as well as municipal tools, and again would look to Maryland to showcase some of the things that you have done. The purchase of agricultural conservation easements, my guess is that, you know, there's always tweaks, as Michelle said, that can be made, and we might be at a point in time where we have to be defensive in terms of tightened state budgets and being able to keep support for these types of programs. So let's go back out. One thing missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land, because there's not a comprehensive data layer focused on ag land protection. We're building this new database now, and you can see that we do have some green in there. In fact, a lot of green in there in Maryland. If you have not heard from us and you hold agricultural easements, please let us know by adding a comment in the question panel. We have been in touch with many state programs, with quite a number of county programs, but we know that we probably have missed folks. So if we've missed you, let us know and we will be in touch. So let's stop there, Jamie, and see if there are questions.
Yes, we've got a couple of questions. I will like to pose this question both to Michelle and to Chris, if you both are game. The question is, to what extent are we using the food security issue to protect and enhance farmland protection? So maybe Michelle, if you want to address that within the state of Maryland, and Chris, maybe more a national perspective.
So can you repeat the question for me?
Yeah, so to what extent are we using food security, the issue of food security, to protect and enhance farmland protection?
So for the MALF program, we do not include that as any specific criteria for our easement program. You know, it is part of our overall, part of our overall mission is for the protection and ability to produce food and fiber for all of the citizens of Maryland, which is the big general statutory mission. But we have not ever gotten down to the food security level. There's been plenty of conversations of availability, but I don't think it has actually entered into any specifics for criteria or focus for our program as a whole for MALF. But it is a good question. I'm writing it down, that's for sure.
Right, and I guess that I would take it up from the national perspective. I think that we are in a very unique period of time, and because of the pandemic, it's the first time in a long time where the general public understands that there can be disruptions in food supply by seeing empty grocery store shelves. and that this has given the public a greater consciousness about what do disruptions in the food supply mean, and the need for resiliency in the system. And from our perspective, that resiliency in the system is in part the resiliency and the need for resilient local and regional food systems, not just a national and global one. And so in thinking about that, it's how do we make the case then that we need robust farms in every state and in all parts of states, and that we need an agricultural land base that is going to support those farms. So for us, it has made the argument around funding for these farmland preservation programs a more persuasive one in many ways to make this argument about the resiliency of regional food systems. Does that directly address the question of food insecurity? No, but again, thinking about what are some of the ways of addressing food insecurity, many of them are encouraging access from local farms, and that if you don't have those local farms, you can't help to promote those connections between folks who are providing food in a variety of different ways to communities with food insecurity. So all of that is to say that we think that having resilient local food systems are extremely important to food security, and that the agricultural land base is essential to those robust food systems.
Great, thank you. Chris, I'm going to send this question to you. There's a question about whether we can provide this data and information by county.
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer is sort of. We are going to be providing the data layers so that if you've got GIS capability, presumably you can use those data layers to identify the land in your county that have been converted to various types of development. Whether we are going to provide sort of spreadsheets that provide that information by county is a good one, and I apologize that I don't know the answer to that, but we will find that out. And I should say that we are compiling a list of frequently asked questions as we're doing these webinars, and we'll send back around a fact sheet or maybe a couple of them as we go through these webinars with this kind of information. So look for more, look for an answer from us on that, but you will definitely be able to get the data layers. It's just I don't know how much those are going to be summarized by county.
Great, and those are our questions for now. So if we want to proceed to the next slide. Thank you. So time is not on our side in saving our farmland and ranch land, which is why AFT just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. You can see here some of the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection. In Maryland, we are hoping to leverage the new National Agricultural Land Network, which Chris will talk a bit about more momentarily, to provide capacity building and peer-to-peer learning for organizations who are or want to be taking an active role in protecting farmland. We hope to partner with other land trusts that want to help with complex projects and expand the reach of our Farm Legacy program, which keeps land and farming as it transitions to the next generation. Enacting farmland protection policies at any level requires a broad bipartisan coalition, and active community engagement. In Maryland, we want to support the outstanding work already happening in the state and help be the voice for farmland protection in Washington, D.C. Finally, we plan to use the findings from Farms Under Threat to guide our activities on the ground, and we are on the lookout for opportunities to build on this research and learn more about what's happening to farmland on a local level. We've provided some important spatial data layers that can be used by states, but our level of analysis really needs to be supplemented at the state level. What more could Maryland do to track its agricultural land use changes and trends, as well as potentially set a goal for retaining and protecting some percentage of remaining farmland? Maryland does an outstanding job of coordinating a suite of policies around permanent protection and farm viability. I think our message here is that Maryland needs to keep its foot on the accelerator. It can't let up given that development pressure is continuing. And perhaps it needs to consider ways to strengthen its land use planning to promote compact development. Again, we give Maryland a lot of credit for a lot of work that is already done. The state has truly been an innovator, continuing to focus on tools around land access and generational transfer will be key. AFT believes that all farmland is important and provides co-benefits, but all farmland is not created equally. And we believe that a special effort needs to be made to protect the state's most productive farmland.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. So I think we have a little bit of time for questions, and I'm not seeing any more right now. So let me take then a moment here to talk about the Farmland Information Center and about the network. And before I talk about them, actually, let's launch our last poll, because this one asks about what do folks feel is the most important technical assistance that would be helpful to you in addressing agricultural land conversion. And again, if you don't see something here that you think that the network can focus on or should be focused on, we would be delighted if you want to write anything in. But these are some of the things that we're thinking about doing, and it would help us to know what priorities folks on the call have. And again, you can vote for more than one. All right, this is helpful on the policy tools. Again, top vote getters, state and local policy tools, information and training around land transfer and land access. So let me start by saying some of what is already available that folks may not be aware of, and that's talking about the Farmland Information Center, which is a collaboration that AFT has had with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for decades. It is both a website and it is technical assistance done through, you can either email in or call that number, and people actually do answer the phone. It runs the gamut from information around state policies and state programs to information and lots of great infographics around various types of statistics. So statistics for the National Resources Inventory, transfer ownership, and whatever the total survey is, it's around landowners and their plans around succession, to the Census of Agriculture, to information around the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. And we are going to be putting up a lot more of those resources around ACEP-ALE in the near future, to be more helpful on that front even. There is information for landowners. So if you are a landowner looking for information about how to protect land, we talk about ways that agricultural conservation easements can be structured. We talk about some of the innovations around land use planning tools. We have a lot of research and studies that are not just ours, but many other academic partners, as well as other land trust and state program partners, and information that makes the case for saving farmland. So if you haven't already been to the FIC, as we call it, I would highly recommend that you take a cruise around it to see what's available, because there is a lot of it. The network is something that is newly launched, and it was really AFT wanting to respond to this recognition of continued conversion by wanting to build the capacity of professionals working not just in agricultural land protection, but those who are in planning and thinking about those planning tools, and how to be supportive of retaining the agricultural land base. So it's intended for both those audiences. We are going to focus on everything from the sort of basics for those who are developing a core curriculum around farmland and ranch land protection, but then moving up to allow for the conversations amongst many of the folks on this call who are very well versed in agricultural protection and trying to figure out what is the best way moving forward. What are those additional tools? As Michelle said, we can't protect it all permanently through the use of conservation easements. Where are the links to agricultural viability? What are the ways that we can be getting more conservation performance from protected land? What are those incentives we might be able to provide to those types of producers? And then how do we work more with incorporating into our farmland protection efforts that access to land? Again, Maryland has done a good job, but we know that we all collectively need to do more, even if we're going to deal with the generational transfer of land. We hope, I think, as Jamie alluded to do some networking at a regional level, so that, you know, in our ideal world, as soon as we are able to do things in person, it would be to get together folks either in Maryland and neighboring states to have some of these conversations about new tools and new approaches and tweaks to existing programs. That's something that still we are hoping to do. So I hope that folks will sign up to be in the network. There are members and collaborators. Members are anybody who are doing direct work in planning or ag land protection. Collaborators are anyone who advocate on behalf of those types of policies and programs. It's open to public agencies. It's not an advocacy entity, so you don't have to worry about that. It's educational and peer networking. So I hope that folks will join. And I guess with that, hang on, I just went back to look at questions. So before I turn it back over to you, Jamie, and in fact, here's a question. I live in Montgomery County's Ag Reserve. Land here is being threatened by a push to place large solar arrays on farmland, purportedly to be farmed underneath. Could use help trying to push back on this. So I'll take a crack at it, but then Jamie or Michelle would love any perspectives from yours. AFT understands that renewable energy development is both important to mitigating climate change and can provide an important source of income for farmers. We also recognize, however, that it can be very problematic for taking additional agricultural land out of production. So the question about whether land can be farmed underneath, I think that the purported is sort of where we are, that it is not proven that dual use solar is, I think there's a lot of questions still about it, and it's something that AFT is looking to be putting more emphasis on in research around that dual use and what actually can be done with agriculture and with solar. But what we have focused on is to say that really trying to shrink the footprint of that renewable energy development and to put it on the more marginal land. So again, that's why we focus on these PVR values to say, if you're going to put it on farmland because there's nowhere else to put it, make sure that it is not on the best farmland available. So I don't know, Jamie or Michelle, if you have other thoughts that you want to share on that.
So this is Michelle. I think you said it very well. The importance of the alternative energy is absolutely critical. However, farmland, and certainly the prime and productive farmland, is a finite resource. Once it's gone, it's gone. So finding that balance is a challenge. For the mouth state easements, we do not allow for commercial alternative use, the solar panel installation projects for a commercial level. I know every county treats it differently, so I don't know what the Montgomery County regulations are for the ag reserve area. I know that is their most protected area of the county. But finding it on the marginal lands, on the slopes, the areas that can't be productively, as efficient and productive would be the places to go. So, and I know there is continued research on that dual use, as you were saying, Chris. I know there's been studies in Europe and in the Western states as well. So it needs to be looked into, but as of now, we don't really have that dual use ability for how they're being installed currently.
Great, thank you. And I am just realizing that I have been reminded by one of my colleagues that we have AFT solar siting guidelines, and I am going to hopefully respond, which will send that information to everybody. And one very last question, which is, does the FIC or FarmLink provide information to help farmers who may be looking to lease land specifically for vegetable production on the Eastern Shore? And I'm going to guess that the Maryland FarmLink program does. Is that correct, Michelle?
I actually don't know much about the Maryland FarmLink program, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, well, we will provide a link. How will we do this? I think all of these questions are going to be answered, but I would start with Maryland FarmLink. The farmland information does not, so I think your best bet is Maryland FarmLink. So with that, I know we are right here at 2 o'clock, so let me turn it over to Jamie for any last thoughts.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Chris, and thank you all for joining us today for this conversation, and to you, Michelle, for joining and providing your really helpful insights and perspective. I will be following up with all of the registrants with an email later today, and what I can do is include in that email the link to our solar siting guidelines, and then also the Maryland FarmLink too. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all again. Have a wonderful day. If you have any questions or any comments, or just want to get in touch with me after this webinar, please do so. I look forward to hearing from you and working with you in the future. Thank you so much.